Hello everybody and welcome back to Military Aviation History. I'm your host Bismarck and today we're at the Finnish Aviation Museum once more taking a look at their lovely exhibit right here. This is a Fieseler Storch, an FE-156, and it is quite a remarkable aircraft with a distinguished service record during World War II. Now this aircraft, its claim to fame essentially, is also that it was used during the rescue of Benito Mussolini from his prison in the Apennine Mountains in 1943, where this aircraft pretty much landed on a mountaintop, but more on that later. What makes the Fieseler Storch so special? Well, it is a STOL aircraft, STOL, short takeoff and land. And as the name implies, this aircraft can take off and land from a remarkably short distance. Again, we're going to go into that as well. The Fieseler Storch was conceptualized in the mid-1930s, and it was essentially an answer to a call to the industry by the German army for a new liaison aircraft. And Fieseler submitted a design, the Fieseler Storch, and Messerschmitt and Siebel, two other companies, did the same. The Fieseler Storch completely demolished the competition. It was better in almost every aspect. However, you might not, by looking at the performance sheet, actually think that this is such a great aircraft. Up front, we have an Argus AS-10 engine, produces roughly 240 horsepower at its maximum setting of 2000 RPMs. However, cruise would usually be around 1700 to 1800 RPM. At that point, you get roughly 200 horsepower, a little bit less on the lower settings. The speed is nothing to write home about. 175 kilometers an hour at maximum, and cruise usually around 120 to 150 kilometers an hour. So again, not the fastest performer, but you really don't need this, because this is a liaison aircraft. It's a reconnaissance aircraft as well, and it was also used for transport, even medical transports. But again, once we get inside of the aircraft, I'll show you all about that. Now, the Fieseler Storch, one of the key features really is the landing gear. Extremely sturdy gear. You could land with this aircraft pretty much everywhere. Now the one we have right here is a Finnish one. This was used, Finland actually got two Fieseler Storchs during the war, and one was destroyed in 1944 sadly, but the other one survived and saw service in the Finnish armed forces after the war up till the mid-50s sort of, and then was sold to a civilian who later on gave it to the museum. So some of these bits look a little different. So for example, the landing gear is different as well, at least the wheels. The original wheels would be 500 by 180s. These are not the original wheels. But this gear is extremely sturdy and allows the Fieseler Storch to land pretty much anywhere. If you're on the Eastern Front and you need to get from one place to the other and you don't want to take, a 109 because you're not quite sure what the conditions are going to be on the other side of the front line, then you take this wing because it can land everywhere, seriously everywhere. Now, one of the other cool features of the Fieseler Storch is of course the wing. Yeah, the wing makes this aircraft what it is. What we can see here is that you can essentially fold both wings to the side. So the left wing here is folded, the right wing, we'll have a look at that as well, is not. To fold the wing, you essentially just have to pull the plug up here, and then you flip up a detachable frame up here, and you just swing it back. It's very, very easy, very, very convenient, also for transport and storing. Now, let's get a little bit closer to this aircraft and check out all the little bolts that make it so spectacular. Now, the Fieseler Storch's recipe for success is essentially a recipe of simplicity. Tubular steel construction in the central fuselage covered in canvas. The wings, well, they're a wooden skeleton covered in canvas once more, and the control surfaces are also made out of wood covered in canvas. This makes this aircraft incredibly light. We're talking about roughly 900 kilograms empty and 1,300 kilograms fully loaded. Now this, of course, plays in the hands of a STOL aircraft. The lighter, the better in that sense. Talking about this aircraft as a reconnaissance aircraft, well, endurance is going to be important. Usually endurance is set around 2 to 3 hours of flight time with a range of 350 kilometers. With a little bit of clever engine management and fuel management, you can beef that up to 4 hours, which is relatively good for an aircraft its size. Talking about the fuel load here. It has a fuel tank in each wing, one in the port wing, one in the starboard wing, each holding, as per the official manual, 47 liters. The Finns apparently disagreed and wrote 75 liters on it, but there you go. I guess 150 liters in the aircraft makes more sense than 148 liters, which seems a little bit German. Anyway, the aircraft, actually here you can see the oil cooler for the engine. The rest of the cooling of this aircraft is actually done by air, just blowing through the engine. This aircraft is a remarkable STOL aircraft, one of the best of its kind, really. The takeoff distance and landing distance, depending on the context we're talking about, headwind, no headwind, so on, is remarkably short at times. The official manual has this nice little graph where it shows at what kind of speeds you can expect a certain amount of landing distance. Now, the minimal permissible speed in this aircraft is 62 kilometers an hour without the flaps deployed. With the flap deployed, that drops down to 51 kilometers an hour. At 51 kilometers an hour, with no headwind, you can expect to land within 30 meters. With a lot of headwind, that can go down to 10 meters. This means that this aircraft, which is essentially 9.9 meters in length, can expect to land in its own length when it has the right situation. What is really cool as well is that the takeoff required with a lot of headwind is roughly 30 meters sometimes, depending on the weight of the aircraft, of course. But if it's fully loaded, there is no real headwind and so on, can go out to 70 to 80 meters. But again, this is really a short distance for an aircraft, and really makes the STOL aircraft a STOL aircraft. Now, looking at the deployed wing here, we actually see quite a few cool little features. This is of course the starboard wing, which you can see fully deployed. And there we go. This would be the aileron, and over here we see the flap. Now, what is cool about this aircraft is, if we look at the leading edge here, is a sort of, the Germans call it Vorflügel. Essentially, it is what you might expect on a 109 as a slat. Yeah, although these ones are fixed on the 109s, they're not fixed. They extend and retract depending on your airspeed and angle of attack. If they're fixed, like here in the Fieseler Storch, they're actually not slats, but slots. The difference is in the vowel there. Anyway, one of the cool little things about this aircraft is that if the pilot deploys his flaps, which you can see fully deployed right here, you have a sort of a curvature in the wing. And this allows you to fly at slower speeds at a higher angle of attack because you still have that lift. What also happens is that if the pilot deploys his flaps, the ailerons droop down a little bit as well. So they kind of follow the flaps in getting you that curvature that you want in order to operate at lower speeds. Cool little feature here as well is of course the not the navigational light, but the landing light, the search light. And then you have the Pitot Tube right here, which you will be able to measure your speed. If we move over closer to the fuselage, this is where the fuel tank would be. And you can also see the fuel tank gauge here. Each side has one, where essentially the pilot just has to look over and read off the remaining content. Over here we have a little tube that would be where you would fire your flare gun out. This aircraft has seen service after World War II with the Finnish Army and Air Force, so it does look a little bit different with a couple of modifications. As you can see, for example, this is not World War II spec right there. You can also see that there are certain patches and so on over here and over there. That is just normal operational use, and actually kind of, I feel, adds a little bit to this aircraft as well. There you can see official Finnish writing. I wasn't lying. Over here as well, you can see the hole, which would be for the trim, and then you have the tail wheel, which is fully turning 360 degrees, and that actually does not look like the one that should be there originally. Again, this is a post-war modification that they made to keep this aircraft running. Afterwards, it was also in civilian use for a couple of years, so there you go. Here we have the elevator, not a little one, that's actually quite a massive elevator, and of course the rudder right there. Right, let's move over to the other side where we have some even more interesting features on this Fieseler Storch. Okay, so we're standing under the starboard wing now, at the right side of the aircraft's fuselage, and you'll see a couple of features here. Of course, we have a first aid kit that would be stored in here, And then we have a very interesting modification that actually happened here. You see this panel right here. Now in the old times, when this aircraft essentially was a German production aircraft, there would be zippers right here. This is where the crew would store a machine pistol for essentially defense. Now the interesting part of that is the manual actually stipulates a MP28-2 Schmeiser. I guess you could also take an MP40 if you get your hands on it, but that's the one that's designated as the defensive weapon of this aircraft. Very interesting as well, because later on there would be modifications of this aircraft with a defensive MG15. Once we're inside, I'll actually show that to you. But the MP pistol was still classed as a defensive weapon of the aircraft, and usually could also reach from the inside and operate it from the inside. Whether the manual actually asks you to defend the aircraft in the air with a machine pistol, I'm not quite sure, but hey, crazier things have been done. Over here, this also seems to be a modification later on. 80 octane, this is actually the same thing as the Germans would pump into their Fieseler Storchs. A free fuel, 65 liters. I think this is a Finnish modification again, that they have put maybe an additional fuel tank here to extend the range of the aircraft. I'm not quite sure. Here are two sketches showing the medical configuration of the Fieseler Storch with the D1, either with one pilot and 2 wounded, or one pilot, 1 medic and 1 wounded. Now before we hop inside though, I do want to say a couple of things on the service of this aircraft, because as I mentioned, it had quite an illustrious career during World War II. Starting right with the invasion of Poland, this aircraft became a staple for the German armed forces. In 1939 already, when Germany invades Poland, the Luftwaffe and the Panzers do have a lot of trouble coordinating their strikes together. Now, usually in popular memory, this was a synchronized event, that no mistakes were made ever. This is not exactly true. There were cooperation and coordination issues. And one of the German generals, Kesselring, actually used this aircraft, or a version of the Fieseler Storch, to coordinate his own actions between the Luftwaffe and the armed forces. And he would land near the front lines, talk with the commanders there, get a picture of the situation, fly back, land somewhere else, talk with those guys, then go back to an airfield, order a couple of strikes, and so on. So this aircraft became incredibly important in that German staple of maneuver warfare, Bewegungskrieg. In 1941, another thing happens actually with this aircraft. In September 1941, General von Schobert with his pilot lands in a Soviet minefield with this aircraft. He's kind of forced down, and he's also one of the leading generals that are pushing into Moscow. He's landing in a minefield with expected results. He didn't make it out. But this aircraft then later on in Africa with Rommel von Richthofen, not the Richthofen that you're thinking about, the World War I ace, but actually a distant relative of his who was a German general during World War II. There's a little thing for you. We're also using this aircraft to get a picture, a feel of the situation, see where the units are, where they need support, and so on. And this aircraft really was important right there. Now, in 1943, the Grand Sasso raid, this is the thing I alluded to earlier, when Benito Mussolini was imprisoned in a ski resort in the Apennine Mountains since July 1943 of that year. This is of course when the Allies were driving up the boot of Italy to expulse the Germans and to essentially also defeat their Italian allies, and the Italians sort of dropped out of the war. At least the occupied parts dropped out and joined the Allies, whereas the northern part was still under the occupation of Germans and just fought on the Axis sides. It was kind of a civil war next to the main event, which was World War II. Now, Benito Mussolini was arrested by the new Italian government, and he was put eventually in the ski resort. Very hard to get to. Yeah? It's up in the mountains, there's no landing strip, there's nothing right there, and Adolf Hitler orders his rescue. What do the Germans have to do? Well, they stage a commando raid, actually quite a daring raid, which in the post-war memory has been gone over and over and over again. They land commandos with gliders there. The problem is not getting to the ski resort. That they've managed. The problem is getting Benito Mussolini out of it, because they're behind enemy lines. They can't just walk out of there. Nobody's going to let them pass. So what happens? Well, they call on a Fieseler Storch. A couple of other plans they had involved a very early type of gyro helicopter kind of affair. That didn't work out. But the Fieseler Storch comes into the fray, and it lands on a mountain slope which has quite a hefty incline. You can see pictures of it online as well. It lands there, remarkably short distance once again, because this is what this aircraft is designed to do. Turns around, Mussolini jumps on board, a German commando by the name of Otto Skorzeny also jumps on board, and they take off. Now this is where nearly disaster strikes. This aircraft is now overloaded. They only factored in Benito Mussolini as an additional passenger, and that's it. So when the aircraft starts moving down the slope to take off, there's a cliff. And depending on the accounts that you have, it doesn't really have more than 60 to 70 meters to take off. But remember, that would be possible with good headwind and with a light aircraft, but right now it's no longer light. Yeah? It has 2 additional passengers on there and a lot of fuel, because it does have to cross that distance into friendly territory. So when the plane crosses the cliff, it dips down, and everybody and their mother screams, fearing that this daring raid that they just pulled off just completely falls apart within the wreckage, and there's the Italian dictator on the mountain slope, and no use to anybody. But the plane just had enough speed to capture that with this dive, to capture itself, and it pulls out and it pulls away, and Mussolini is saved. Well, for 2 more years, because eventually in April 1945 he's captured by Italian partisans and shot. But he's saved for 2 more years. Hooray, I guess. Interesting, Otto Skorzeny, or Skorzeny, as you want to pronounce him perhaps, I'm not quite sure myself, was not supposed to be on the plane, as I said. He was also not, even though this is in the post-war memory, the guy who actually planned this whole affair. Those were other officers that people have seemed to have forgotten. Yeah? He was part of the planning process, yes, but he was never really the man who sanctioned off the raid or planned every little detail of it. He was just happened to be there as one of the German officers that was involved. And he essentially forced himself on this aircraft. He said, "We're not leaving without me on this aircraft." And I think Otto knew a publicity stunt when he saw one. And of course, getting back into friendly lines with Mussolini in the back, he was the hero. He was the man that saved Mussolini. So quick thinking on his part, which nearly ended in a disaster. But then again, risk and reward. There we go. Right. That is essentially it. What I wanted to talk about the service record of this aircraft. No, there's one more thing. Hannah Reach. It is April 1945. The Soviets are closing in on the Fuhrer bunker in Berlin. It's over. It's done. The war is lost. However, the Germans still keep fighting on for a couple of days, all the way into May. Hannah Reitsch, next to Melita von Stauffenberg, was one of the leading female aviators of Germany, and she actually had the rank of the captain back then. And she flew with a German general into Berlin to try to get Hitler out, to try to convince him, come with us, we'll fly you out of here, the Soviets are not supposed to get their hands on you. Hitler refuses. And having landed this aircraft essentially next to the Fuhrer bunker on a street in the middle of Berlin, she then takes off again and flies away to safety towards the American lines. Quite a remarkable aviating feat, I might add. Never mind what you might think about the people involved. So yeah, that's us done with the service record now, finally. Let's get inside, and for this, I wanted to say one thing. There is a little step here for the aircraft. This is actually not 100% stable, and because the wing was also folded away, we're going to use what I would call one of the greatest inventions of humankind, a ladder. Right, so let me just put that down very carefully. We open up the cockpit very easy, and there's a little bit of a latch here, which we can put that in place. There we go, and now we can get into the aircraft. Over here would be, in World War II specs, flare gun charges right here. So you'd have white, red, and green. Right, let's do this. Okay, so getting into the aircraft right now here, a little bit tricky. So this is a C-1, which means that it doesn't have the defensive armament, but it essentially is a free-seater at this point in time. We have the pilot seat, we have a second seat right there, and we have a potential third seat in the back. In World War in World War II, the Fieseler Storch eventually would all be retrofitted to a C-2 or C-3 with that defensive armament in the back. The chair that the camera is currently resting on, which would be the passenger's chair, is retractable. So what essentially would happen, we'll have a look at that later on as well, is you would retract or kind of fold that chair on itself, and then you could turn around and operate the machine gun in the back. However, for the pilot over here, we of course have all the dials and so on. We're going to have a look at them, but a few things I want to point out. Over here would be where the flare gun would be resting. There's a little bit of a tube. There's a small box, and over down here there is the Anlasspumpe, which is kind of the starter pump, I guess you could translate that. Right, let's get into the pilot seat and see what we can do there. Let's try to not step on too many things. I think I might have done this the wrong way with my wrong leg first, but that's fine. And we are in the cockpit. How's it hanging? Anyway, there we go. This is the Fieseler Storch, and let's have a look what's up here. Okay, so starting with the main dials, you can see that there are a mixture of German and Finnish ones. Starting on the left here, we have the fuel cock, which, well, it's in Finnish, as you can see. We've got the magnetos down here, and over here would be where initially was the starter button, right? No longer here. We've got your speed with enthusiastically marked 350 as maximum. Redline speed would actually be roughly 260, 270 was kind of the maximum permissible speed. But as I said, it wouldn't go further than 175, 180. We've got turn and slip indicator right here. We've got your variometer. Then over here we have your revolutions for the engine. As I said, maximum permissible speed for about 5 minutes, as per the manual, is 2000 revolutions, but would be right here. And actually, let's have it like this. But normally you would operate around this setting right here. We've got a clock, very important. We've got your altitude, and over here we've got your oil temperature. As I said, the aircraft is air cooled for the most part, except for the oil. And then, of course, here we have the flow pressure for the fuel and the oil. This is the new starter button right here. This is what the Finns have added. And then over here would typically be your checklist. You would pull that out, turn it around, then you have it. And this is, I'm not quite sure what this is. It's Aus and Ein in German, but below it is Finnish. I think this might have been something to do with the lighting. I know I have Finns in my community, so you tell me what that means. And then we have the fuel pumps right here. You can select left, right, or all of them. Vasen is one of the directions, and Oikea is the other one. I don't know which is left and which one is right. Over here we have the fuel pump. Yeah, and here we have some electrical equipment to your right, as you would usually expect it. So we've got the battery starter right here. We've got, let me just readjust myself. We've got, I hope I get this together. This is, I believe, this is our navigational lights. And this is the landing light. This is something else that I can't translate. But it's, oh no, it's cabin light. This is cabin light, of course. Yeah, and then you've got your VHF and ADF right there. As you can see down there, the rudders would be, I'm not going to place my feet on them right now, but I'm not putting them actually down, but there we go. It's a nice little fit. To your left, you have your throttle right here and mixture control. Now, the way this works usually is that you can operate them separately. So this would be in the rich setting and pushed forward in the lean setting. But as you're pulling the throttle back towards essentially no throttle, you're also going to be pulling back the mixture automatically as you're operating the throttle. And down here we have the flap setting that essentially runs a chain up into the top part of your cabin, and that goes, of course, to the left and to the right flap. We're not going to operate that just now. And here we have the trim tab, where you can see at what setting your trim is set. And over here is that wheel, which you can operate to set your trim. And there's that flare gun holster. To start up this aircraft, it's actually remarkably easy. You just engage the fuel cock all the way on top, yeah, so up. You engage the magnetos, M1 and M2, up. And you also have the fuel pumps set to both, which actually I've noticed might be actually in the middle for the fins. So for the Germans, it would have been in the top setting here, but for the Finns, it seems to be Eugen and Vasen here. So that's quite an interesting modification that they've made there. Then you pull the primer, which was usually here. You start pumping and pumping and pumping and pumping and pumping until you get that pressure, and then you just press this button. The manual says put your throttle to 1/3, and yeah, you're hopefully good to go. Interestingly, the Fieseler Storch also had a firefighting mechanism, which would be activated by the pilot in case of a fire in the engine compartment. And it would flood this compartment with the contents of a small extinguisher via 3 nozzles that are set at the 3, 12 and 9 o'clock position around the engine. Before I forget it, actually, there is a compass in this aircraft. As you can see, it's on the top half of the aircraft's instrument deck here. Realistically speaking, it should be up here. This is where the Germans had put it. But since this is a modification, of course, it actually makes somewhat sense to put it down there where all the other dials is then up there. But that works. Also, a couple of cabin lights. You've got one here. You've got another one in the same kind of place. Camera's not really picking that up. But there you go. Plenty of lights. You've got your windows to open up. You've got another window here. Sometimes there would also be a window up front here. For the pilot to operate. And what is actually cool about this aircraft, and it gives credence to its reconnaissance role, is that you have this little outcrop in your fuselage with windows. So the view that you have outside here is actually remarkable. Really, really remarkable. It's a great aircraft. Usually the pilot could also shield himself from the sun with a cloth canvas that was retractable and deployable inside the cockpit. However, here on the Finnish variant, this seems to have been removed. Alright, welcome to the back seat of the Fieseler Storch. This seat right here, which would be for the passenger, can be folded forwards. You'd have a platform up here, and that would allow you to operate the machine gun that is pointing rearwards. Now, in order to get in, you essentially have to squeeze past the pilot's seat. For those that are a bit taller, this might be somewhat of a challenge, but there you go, we are now inside. Now, first thing you'll notice is there's actually quite a lot of room. Even though getting into the aircraft is a little bit difficult, once you're inside, I have plenty of space here. I'm about 1.90 meters, so if I don't really require any space, nobody at the time really required any space. Back here, since this is C1 or the export variant, which would be the K1, there is no machine gun. What would usually be here is an MG15 from the C2 variant onwards. An MG15, which is essentially your standard German defensive weaponry. It's a 7.92mm Mauser machine gun. You know, it gets the job done, but it's not exactly heavy defensive weaponry. This would be mounted in an LLK, which is a kleine Linsenlafette. Why it's not a KLL, I don't know, because that's the way we say it in German, so I don't know. It would be pointing towards the back. This machine gun doesn't have any kind of firing restrictions, so the gunner has to be a little bit careful that he's not, well, Indiana Jonesing the pilot here by ripping the rudder to shreds. And the passenger has 4 reloads of snake drums, which essentially just drums that go on either side of the machine gun. Each has 75 rounds. If you do the math, that is 300 shots. Then he's out. It's possible maybe that some of them took additional ammunition. It is possible, but to be honest, slightly unlikely. What would also be an option, and usually, is that you could reach the machine pistol somehow from the inside. The machine pistol would usually be supplied with 2 additional magazines as well. However, in this aircraft, as you can see, this has been modified here. And so it's no longer original, but essentially up to Finnish Army specs of the Cold War era. So yeah, there we go. This is how the Fieseler Storch looks from the inside. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let's go to the outside and have a few final thoughts on this magnificent aircraft. Right, this is gonna be tricky. I'm gonna try to get myself out of here. There we go. The ladder is in place. and we are out of Fieseler Storch. So yeah, that concludes our look at this aircraft. It is one of the most loved and celebrated aircraft to come out of the 30s, and really owners of this aircraft nowadays still speak very, very highly of its characteristics. And I hope you learned something today. And if you didn't even know this aircraft, tell us down below. You know, this is one of those aircraft that often get overlooked, but it shouldn't. And if you really learned something from this, tell me what's your favorite thing you learned about this aircraft at the moment. And I also want to thank specifically here the Finnish Aviation Museum for allowing us to film this aircraft, specifically here Valerie, who kind of gave me a little bit of a tour and showed me how to access it and so on. You really ought to give this museum a go, guys. It really is spectacular. I also want to thank my Patreons for supporting my channel with small contributions, sometimes $1, $2 a month. That can go a long way in helping me maintain the channel and bringing you these kind of uploads, because essentially you guys funded my trip here over to Finland to get this done. So if you do enjoy the content, please check that out as well. And as always, have a great day, good hunting, and see you in the sky. Right, I think I'm going back inside. Yes. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yes, this is what I'm doing. Yes, yes, yes. Much better.